Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video I'm going to show you how to put together a pretty effective 1080p gaming PC for around about £600 with parts that you can actually buy today. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, on today's video we'll be taking a look at some of the components that you may need or may want to buy to build a PC around about the £600 mark here in the UK. Now, I have a weird twist of fate. Pretty much everything on today's list is from amazon.co.uk, so if you want to check out the prices where you are at the moment, we will put some affiliated links in the video description. We do get a little kickback from those purchases. It doesn't cost you any more, but it does go some way to helping the channel, so if you can use those affiliate links, then please do so. But with that said, let's get on and get into it. So this is a 1080p gaming PC. It will do 1440p to some extent, although not at crazy high frame rates, but it will get the job done. This has a little bit of room as well for future growing with new AMD processors coming out. The 5000 series, as of today, which is the 17th, the processors still aren't on the shelf, so we can't buy them, so that puts them out of the question, but it would be nice to have a system which is completely compatible, straight out of the box, ready for those processors. So I've gone with some components which will work perfectly in tandem with them, no bottlenecks, no restrictions, should be just a drop-in upgrade. Now the one thing is the motherboard, potentially if you buy slightly older stock, it may not have that updated BIOS on it, but that's a whole different can of worms which we can look at later. But let's get into it and I'll show you some of the items on the list. So we've used the PC part picker, and on this I've actually saved it, so you can go to this in the video description and check out for yourself and make any modifications you wish to. Again, obviously if you're in the UK this works better for you. If you are in another country, then you can go up to this top corner here where it says United Kingdom, select the drop down list and you can choose your country of origin, and then it will update the prices automatically and also the vendors, etc, etc. So you can work it out for your own particular regions. But like I said, well, it's pretty obvious, but I'm a English person living in the United Kingdom, so I'm going to use the United Kingdom version. So where are we going to start with? Let's start with the processor. Now the processor at the moment is a pretty tough call, but also is an easy solution. It's a very double-edged sword, this one. I've gone with the AMD Ryzen 3 3100, which is a 3.6 GHz quad-core processor with hyper-threading, so 8 threads. It's actually a really good value for money processor and gives processors like the Intel 6700K and the 7700K a good run for their money in some titles and also in things like productivity, Cinebench R20, that kind of thing. With a little bit of an overclock, which generally these will do, you can surpass that and get a little bit higher. This is, in my opinion, an ideal placeholder. It will play games now, it is fine for use, and you can actually run with this PC for the next couple of years and you should be absolutely fine. But if you are waiting for the latest and greatest processor from AMD to come out, this should be pretty easy to do. Just take it out, put the new one in, very little fuss. This is a 3000 series and we are running on a B550 motherboard to make life a little bit easier for ourselves. I've used this processor for a little while now and I actually find it to be very good. Plays games exceptionally well, and for under £100 I don't think you can really do much better. There is obviously Intel alternatives, something like the 10300 is it, or 1030. I'm not too sure what it is. I don't really pay much attention to the current Intel offerings, but there is a similarly priced model with a similar spec which you can obviously go to if you want to, but we're going to be concentrating on AMD on this particular build. Obviously, if you do have a little bit extra in your budget, maybe you've got £700, £750, you could quite easily sort this out for what is the next best processor in my opinion, which would be the Ryzen 5 3600, which again is an absolutely killer processor, and at the moment in the UK you get this for about 180. Whether or not it's actually worth double the price of the Ryzen 3 3100 in gaming tasks, it certainly will give you a little bit more headroom for the future, but again, because we've got those new processors coming out and some in the start of the new year, it's a really risky time to be spending extra amount of money. So if you're on a really tight budget and every penny counts, certainly the Ryzen 3 3100 is a really good place to start. I was very strongly considering the 3300X, and I can imagine there's a lot of you in the comments already getting ready with your itchy fingers, putting in there, oh, what about the 3300X? Initially, that is what I would have put in there. At the moment in the UK, when available, you can pick those up for £115, which is fantastic value for money and certainly is an upgrade and an increase in performance with the CCX enhancements, etc. But the limited availability means that I can't really put it on this list at the moment. If I was doing a kind of wish list, then certainly I would do and I'd wait for it to come back into stock. But the idea behind this entire list is that all the items are currently available in stock in the UK at the moment. So next up is the CPU cooler. Now, CPU cooler wise, you don't really need an additional cooler for this particular build. If you want to keep things a little bit quieter and cooler, then certainly at the moment the Arctic cooling, the Freezer 34, is currently on offer on Amazon.co.uk at $19.99, which is a phenomenal price. I would certainly recommend that. But in the grand scheme of things, with the budget constraints, etc., it isn't entirely necessary. So obviously, I will put that link in the video description. So if you want to, you could add that on just to give yourself a silent PC. But essentially, it isn't entirely necessary. So I've omitted it in this particular PC part picker list. Now, next up is the motherboard. Now, this is one which I really did struggle with. There's so many options available, all of which are excellent choices, but ultimately it came down to future-proofing, flexibility, to some extent some of the aesthetics, but essentially it comes from going with what you know and what you trust. Now, Asrock boards for me have always been exceptionally good. I can imagine there's loads of you keyboard warriors out there thinking, oh no, it's got to be an Asus, it's got to be an MSI, etc., etc., which is absolutely fine. Go with whichever you choose. It doesn't bother me. I'm just pointing out this is a particularly good board at the moment, a particularly good price, and with a fantastic feature set. The Asrock B550M Pro 4, this is the Micro ATX version, an exceptionally good board. Future support for the latest and greatest Ryzen 5000 processors, 4 RAM channels, NVMe support, digital addressable RGB, pretty much everything you can ask for, including a decent VRM, all for under £100, which I think ticks a lot of boxes. Now, certainly if you wanted to go a little bit cheaper, you could possibly go with the A520 boards, such as the MH, which I reviewed a while back, which you can check out up here, the Gigabyte one. You can pick those up for around about £60. You do get some limitations with that. Obviously, overclocking is extremely limited. You can have addressable RGB on it, but again, it is very, very limited for what it is. If you're going for a super budget system and you're not really looking towards future upgrades, and this is going to be all you're going to build, and it's just going to be that for the next couple of years, then certainly do go with the Gigabyte cheaper model. But if you're looking for a little bit of flexibility and an upgrade path, then I think the Asrock B550M Pro 4 is an excellent choice. And if we have a closer look at it, it is absolutely a lovely looking board. You've got this massive VRM heatsink, you've got your 4 RAM channels, you've got your NVMe and also NVMe protection and cooler. You've got your enhanced PCI Express slots with the metal bound on there to give you a little bit of extra strength. And overall, I think it is a really nice looking board. Now, coming up to the case we're using, some of this kind of does make sense because there is almost like a coloured theme in this, so it does make sense for this particular build. But again, I do think personally this is a fantastic value for money option. Memory wise, again, memory is going to be another tricky one. You can, if you want to, put a little bit more money in the pot and go for DDR4 3600, which is pretty much the sweet spot for most of these Ryzen processors, but essentially it isn't entirely required. DDR4 3200 works absolutely fine, and unless you're actually benchmarking and doing some specific tasks, you're very unlikely to notice the difference between the DDR4 3200 and the 3600 and even beyond. Also, you do get fantastic savings as well. We've gone for a 16 gig kit. This is the Kingston HyperX Fury 16 gig kit, 2x 8 gigabytes. It is DDR4 3200 CL16 memory, and at the moment that's under £50 here in the UK. So £25 a stick for 8 gigs is pretty much where most of it bottoms out. I've never seen 8 gig sticks much cheaper than that. There was a time with DDR3 where it did dip a little bit at the end of the FX series, but essentially I think it's going to be pretty much that is going to bottom out. I can't see it getting much cheaper. So it's certainly a really good time to pick up that memory. And again, it's Kingston RAM, so you get lifetime warranty, etc., etc. And it looks pretty decent in the kit. So nice black heat shields on there to keep things looking very nice. So that takes us on to storage. Now, storage is again, a very personal thing. I've gone with what would be a good setup for gamers. For gamers, NVMe drives don't necessarily give you much of a benefit apart from maybe fractional loading times, as we've seen from hardware unboxed videos recently. So I've gone for what are value options with reliability and longevity in mind. So for the main storage, I've gone for a Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB, so a 3.5-inch mechanical drive, 7200 RPM, very good rated drive, and at under £35 I think is fantastic value for money for your bulk storage. For our main Windows drive and maybe the odd Steam game or two, I've gone with the Silicon Power A55, which is a 512GB SSD. This is SATA 6, so it's around about 500 megabytes per second transfer speeds, but again, we don't necessarily need NVMe. If you wanted to swap that out for an NVMe drive, certainly you can do to make things a little bit neater, but you will pay a slight price premium for that. Now, silicon power drives, as most of you will know if you've been regulars to the channel, I do really like these silicon power drives. There's pretty much something for everyone, so if you do want to go for those, please do. If you've got a particular brand that you prefer more than silicon power, or you can find cheaper, such as the TC Sunbows or the Asenso drives on Amazon, then please do feel free to go for those. The TC Sunbow ones I've used and they've all seemed to be pretty good, and they've not had any problems yet. Likewise, the silicon power ones have done me very well, and I haven't lost any data, which is always a good sign. Silicon power drives generally tend to have slightly better warranties, but again, depends if you're keeping the system for a long time. If this is a quick build and you're going to flip it or whatever, then the warranty goes on to the next person, so you're not particularly bothered. But essentially what I'm saying is, go for drives which you trust and is within your budget. You don't necessarily need an NVMe drive as much as it would make cabling a lot nicer and look a bit nicer, and on paper it obviously looks better if you're selling it on, but it isn't entirely necessary for a gaming PC. So next up is our case. Now the case is actually, this is actually what started the entire build idea actually. I've gone with the Thermaltake S100, which is a micro ATX mini tower case. I found it on UK Hot Deals today. Actually came out for $34.99, which again, for a micro ATX case is not brilliant, but it is a relatively good price. But being that it's Thermaltake, I know from a fact from previous Thermaltake cases I've had, the build quality is generally excellent. The overall design is generally very good as well. And also packaging wise, Thermaltake stuff comes packaged so well, it's ridiculous. So you know, if you're building this system as a flip system, you're going to send it somewhere, it's going to come in really good packaging, so it's going to withstand a few drop kicks from DPD or UPS or whoever your postal service is. I personally think it's a really nice looking case. You've got a solid front with a ventilated side. It does show there with RGB fans. It doesn't come with RGB fans as stock. It comes with a standard 120mm fan on the back there. Just the one single fan, so you will need extra fans really. The mesh on both sides, possibly for some people, isn't going to be enough. Some people will want that full mesh front. If you do, then you could swap this out easily for one of the Ions range cases. The KZ10, for instance, is a pretty good option. The build quality is worlds apart. The Ions cases are quite cheap and cheerful, but that is what they are. Thermaltake cases, for me personally, have always been very good quality. So, and actually, I like the hinge on this one. This has got a hinge side tempered glass window. You've got little hinges there, which you can just about make out. But yeah, I like it. It's a really nice looking case, and you can see it's got that slightly unusual design of the tempered glass, which just sets it apart a little bit from the rest of the pack, in my opinion, rather than being just a solid piece or a square piece or whatever. You've got these rounded edges, and it's all tapered in nicely. It looks the real deal as far as I'm concerned. And you've got a bit of ventilation on the other side also. Solid front, which again, some people may prefer if you're in an environment where it's very, very dusty. Having a mesh front is not the greatest ideas because you spend most of your time just cleaning the mesh every day. At least with this, you've just got the sides to clean to keep things nice and cool and possibly quiet as well. And from the back, you can see you've got a nice bit of width there. They do actually say that this case can actually take a 200mm fan in the top section, which yeah, is pretty amazing. So if you want a really quiet system, you could even set up some kind of negative pressure system, 200mm on the top. We'll take it the front. You can take two 120s, two 140s, you can put an AIO in there, 280 radiator, that sort of thing. And in the back, you can fit in a 120mm fan. Only that is the biggest you can get in there, not a 140 or anything like that. So cooling wise, I think it's pretty much covered. You've got some decent ventilation on there. It's not as good as a open mesh front, as I said, but I think for 35 quid here in the UK, you can do a lot worse. If you do like the look of this case, but you prefer it in a white version, they do actually do the white version of this for about £43. So if you want the snow edition, they do that also, which again, is also a very good shout. Although whether or not I would spend maybe 25% extra having the case in a white finish than a black finish, I guess that really is one of those cosmetic choices. So moving on down, next up, pretty boring stuff, but a couple of fans, because obviously it only comes with one, so I wanted to populate the front with an additional two fans with some static pressure to try and combat that filtered front. So we've got two Arctic P12, they're the 120mm fans. You could go for the 140s, but it does add quite a bit to the build. These are £6 each, and they've got the PWM sharing technology, so if you've got a motherboard which doesn't have a lot of connectors on, which the B550 Pro 4 actually has loads of fan connectors on, so you're not going to have any issues there. But again, those are great fans, relatively quiet. They've got a really, really good range of speeds on them, but like some crazy low speed, like 200 RPM up to, I think it's about 1800 RPM. So again, really nice fans, and they certainly get the job done. I haven't gone with RGB ones purely because really this is quite a understated build. There isn't a lot of RGB. You could easily add a little bit if you wanted to. Obviously that will affect the prices, but I've chosen on this particular case and system not to go down that route. Okay, so next up is going to be the graphics card. Now the graphics card on this is one of those things which actually kind of almost define the build and also the price and the case also to some extent as well. Value for money wise at the moment, I don't think there's anyone would argue that the NVIDIA GTX 1660 Super is pretty much bang on. Gives you fantastic levels of performance, but for not a massive amount of money. If you want to go up a level, maybe to 1440p gaming, then you do end up spending considerably more money. You're looking then at 2070s, maybe 2060s at a push, but the 1660 Super does seem to tick all those boxes for around about £200 here in the UK, and certainly for the extra premium over the 1650 Super, it does give you quite an uplift in performance, but for not a huge amount of extra money. A lot of the 1650 Supers here in the UK tend to range from maybe £150 through to almost £200 anyway, depending on the brand and the version. So the 1660 Super for me is the one to go for, and also the increase of VRAM from 6GB in the 1660 Super, from the 4GB in the 1650 Super, does give you a little bit more breathing room for those higher resolutions. So for this particular one, I've gone with the MSI GeForce GTX 1660 Super. This is the 6GB VENTUS X SoC video card. What a mouthful that is, I won't be saying that again. I'll just refer to it as the VENTUS, I think. Now at the moment this is £210 from AWD-IT. I have actually seen this on Amazon as well, but for some reason PC Part Picker wouldn't pick it up, and I was messing around with this spreadsheet before I got into doing this video, so I do apologise for that. So you'll probably notice if you're eagle-eyed that this was at the bottom, is now at the top, and I did have a different card on there. I opened up the wrong spreadsheet. I'm useless. But essentially this is really what I think is bang for buck territory. The MSI cards are generally quite good. The VENTUS isn't the best of the 1650 Supers, but certainly does get the job done, and for me the price is definitely right. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Is this the right choice of video card for this particular system? I think personally that the Ryzen 3100 is actually a very good match for this particular card, as would be the Intel 7700K, which again, they do kind of trade blows. So for me this works out really well. It keeps us within a moderate budget. We're not kind of having any crazy bottlenecks, and certainly if you did want to upgrade the processor to maybe the Ryzen 5 3600, that would also sit very well with this particular graphics card. And actually if you're doing other things like streaming, video editing, all those kinds of things, obviously the NVIDIA cards do excel in those tasks. So that takes us to the last one, which is the power supply, which again, some of you will hate this one. It was again a toss-up between, do I go with a real well-known branded one and pay the premium, or do I go with one which is slightly off-brand but has very similar, if not exactly the same components? A lot of people don't quite understand how power supplies work, who makes them, etc, etc. Generally, most power supplies on the market, there's a select number of companies which actually produce them, and they often then sell them to other companies, and they make slight refinements and stick a badge on them. That is how the power supply industry works. EVGA, companies like that, Corsair, etc., they don't really make their own power supplies. They subcontract someone else to make it for them, as do, in this particular instance, CIT. Now, CIT had a terrible name for power supplies and cases back in the early 2000s, but certainly recently they seem to have really upped their game as far as their power supplies are concerned. Some of the FX Pro range actually do contain Japanese capacitors to the most extent, at least where they're important, and they do have great functionality. They have PFC control, good ripple control, all those kinds of things. Again, it's not an amazing power supply, but for this particular budget, you don't really want to be spending too much money. You could quite easily swap out for an EVGA one if you wanted to, or Corsair power supply. Again, that is entirely up to you, but for me personally, I've used quite a few of these CIT power supplies now, and they do actually work very, very well. They're very quiet. Cabling on them is very nice. It isn't modular, but again, it certainly gets the job done, and it is at 80 plus bronze with around about 88% efficiency, which is pretty darn good in my opinion. At the moment, that is £41 or £40.99 here in the UK from Amazon.co.uk, which again is what I would consider a sensible price for a power supply. Power supplies have gone crazy ever since the COVID things kicked in, and power supplies are going for crazy, crazy prices. If this was a different time and that wasn't a factor, then I would certainly be going for possibly one of the cheaper EVGA or Corsair power supplies, but they seem to have taken a hit more than others. So for me, the CIT FX Pro takes the win. So overall, our price for this entire system as it stands is £635.83. Now again, you can tweak that down a little bit. You could take out a couple of fans and maybe change the power supply, maybe change the case. Again, it is very flexible. This is pretty much aimed as a guide of what you can get for your money, and certainly components that I would potentially buy myself. If I was doing it myself, which I possibly might do actually, I've got most of the components for this already. There's a few that I could do with getting. If I was going to change anything, honestly, I don't think there's anything particularly that I would specifically change. The case is the only one which I'm a little bit on the fence with. It would be nice to have a full mesh front, but if you're going full mesh, you do really go to that kind of really bargain basement area, which for this level of system, for £600, I don't think you want to be cheaping out too much on a case, especially if you're considering any resale value. Spending a little bit of money on a case extra over and above what you need is always worthwhile, especially if you're looking at keeping hold of it. So if I wasn't going to be using this one, I'd probably go with a full size case, maybe something like the GameX F15, or maybe even if I'm just going for a smaller micro ATX build, then the GameX Kamikaze is always a really good shout and comes with all the fans, looks really nice, and if you can get it at the right price, is definitely worth a look. But other than that, I don't think there's anything else I would change. Maybe adding a little bit of RGB, because hey, you know me, I like my RGB. But I think as it stands, it's a great system. We'll be very happy at 1080p gaming, well in excess of 60 frames per second in most titles, even at high or ultra settings. If you wanted to run that at 1440p, if you've got a monitor that supports it, I'm pretty sure that this system would quite easily get you 60 frames per second in most titles. Obviously, that isn't a golden rule, and don't quote me to it, but I think in general, that is where you'd be looking. But anyway, that pretty much wraps things up. Let me know in the comments what you think of the build, any specific items you would have changed, or what sort of budget would you be looking at to build your own PC, so that I can maybe look at other PC part picker lists in that price range. So, I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.